Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be reacting to the opening statement made by the defense in the Timothy Ferriter case. Now just some background. Timothy Ferriter is the adopted father of 16-year-old Ronan, and police discovered that he had been living in an 8-foot by 8-foot box built in the garage, specially constructed to restrict Ronan's access to the rest of the house. Ostensibly, this was for the safety of other family members, other children in the house, and for parents. Because Ronan had some behavioral and emotional difficulties, he was diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder as well as ADHD. And so we're watching the opening statement for the defense today. And full disclosure, I have not watched this yet. Things have just been so busy in terms of production and editing that I haven't had the time to actually watch this before. So you're getting my unfiltered reactions here to whatever the defense might say. Now, as a bit of a setup, the news company that published this did say that anytime names of minors are used in this segment, that they have cut the audio. And so if you hear any gaps in the audio, that is what's going on. That is for the privacy and the protection of the minors who are involved in this case. Let's dive into it.
Parents' responsibility to make tough choices. Tough choices to protect their child, tough choices to protect their other children, and tough choices to protect the community. And that is what Tim Ferriter did.
I see the premise that this attorney is going for, and I talked about this in the last video when I was reacting to the state's opening statement, that the Ferriters as a couple were in a really difficult position. Reactive attachment disorder is notoriously hard to treat because it deals with potentially trauma and neglect that happened so far in the past in the child's development, but has very explosive and volatile results later on in life. And so yes, definitely safety for Ronan was a factor. Safety for other family members was probably a real concern. But again, we have to keep in mind the extent that they went to in kind of unilaterally creating a jail cell for him was not the right move.
He was faced with an impossible situation, and he made tough choices from himself, from the other children in his home, and from the community. You only have to make one determination in this case, and that is whether or not Tim Ferriter had the criminal intent necessary. That's it. Did he or did he not have the criminal intent? And that will be your guiding question throughout this.
All right, so this is where maybe a lawyer's reaction would be helpful. But judging intent in a lot of cases is very difficult. So I hope this attorney describes what intent really means and how these jurors are supposed to determine what his intent was, and with the charges being aggravated child abuse. And so thinking back to the state's opening argument, their attorney said that the jurors just have to decide whether there was harm caused by Ferriter's actions. And so this attorney is saying they have to determine whether there was intent, and I assume that means to cause harm to the child in question. And so I think there's a little bit of legal question here that maybe some of you lawyers in the comments might be able to illuminate for me. What's actually the standard here for determining whether there is abuse or not?
This case is not about whether or not Tim Ferriter made the right choice, because I will be the first to tell you, the defense will be the first to tell you that he did not. But what it is about is the difficulty of parenting, right? Because bad parenting does not make somebody a criminal. Bad parenting.
Let me take a second here. I think the lawyer is, whether intentionally or unintentionally, doing something very slick here. She's appealing to all or nothing thinking. She's saying that bad parenting by definition is not criminal. And I get that, absolutely. But what she's conflating is that what Ferriter and his wife did, imprisoning their child, not providing him with proper sanitary facilities, not providing potentially enough food for him to eat, not providing stimulation through social interaction, that is not just within the realm of bad parenting. That is way beyond the bad parenting piece to actually abusive, limiting his ability to develop, his ability to grow. So again, this is slick. I don't know whether it's intentional or not, and obviously she's paid to do her job and defend him. I think there's a tool being used here to play this off as just bad parenting in an impossible situation, which I don't want to deny the impossibility of the situation, but I do want to deny that this is merely bad parenting.
Does not mean that a person should be charged with a crime. It makes them human. It makes them a parent who is trying to figure out, when faced with a child, as you'll hear throughout the trial, who has consistent and escalating behavioral issues, how to handle them. You will learn more throughout the trial, but I want to try in these next few minutes to share with you what that relationship looked like. In 2009, Tim Ferriter and his wife Tracy took the very long flight to Vietnam to adopt. Tracy had spent some time in the Honduras, and so they were really motivated to adopt. And they wanted her to have a sibling that was culturally close to her. While in just a few years, they go from this young couple to a little family. They have 3 little babies, and this is really the first iteration of that.
And so I do want to say that, like the defense is saying, going from being a young couple to suddenly having 3 kids, if it was 3 babies at the same time, holy crap, yes, that's a difficult situation to be in. But again, this is why we have mental health services. This is why we have social services, social workers, case managers, counselors, therapists, people who can step in and be alongside the parents as they're navigating a very difficult time in their life. Heck, 1 baby is a difficult transition for anybody. And so I don't want to be downplaying that they were in a tough situation throughout this whole entire case and anytime I react to something that's related to this case. But again, they need to have been asking for help, seeking help, and getting that instead of trying more and more desperate ways to just try to control the situation.
Tim and Tracy love these children.
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
They did everything that they could when they were young. Karate, softball, science posters and galaxies. So he had a periodic table of elements and stuff about galaxies in his room because those were his interests. But what we don't know is how our stories will be written. We don't know where our children are going to end up. And as parents, all you can do is try to raise children who make good choices, who are going to be productive members of the community, and hope that that works.
Okay, I'm with her on that. As parents, we like to have control. We like to know how our kids will end up. We don't have that kind of control. We don't have that kind of foresight. But to want someone to be a productive member of society, to want to raise them in that way, imprisoning them, giving them limited food, limited interaction, limited freedom and ability to make choices, that's not the way to make someone productive in any society.
Later in this week, you will hear from a seasoned psychologist, Dr. Sheila Rappa. Dr. Rappa is well respected as a forensic psychologist. She's routinely hired by the state attorney's office. She is routinely court appointed to conduct psychological evaluations in this county, to give opinions about psychiatric or psychological expertise. And her specific experience is working with uniquely qualified to speak with you about the records that she's reviewed and the patterns of behavior that she noticed.
I do want to say, I do not envy this forensic psychologist her position. The defense's witness defending somebody who is accused of abusing their child, and then to be testifying in their defense and worried about what that does to someone's professional reputation if they're in public on record as maybe saying this wasn't abusive or there are extenuating circumstances in this case. I don't think that relates to the professional in general or the case, but something to think about.
a neurological examination. And what it shows, and as Dr. Rappa will explain to you, is that neuropsychological evaluation showed elevated levels of a lack of inhibition and clinically elevated levels of a lack of emotional regulation. And as Dr. Rappa will explain to you, these elevated levels are associated with early life brain development, usually when someone's a baby, pre-verbal, or even in utero. And that
So those two pieces that she's talking about combine to mean they're going to be very emotionally reactive, very elevated emotions, so high spikes and low lows, as well as lowered inhibition, more impulsivity. I do want to specify that she did say this is a clinical level of concern, but you're also describing most teenagers. But that's not to downplay the trauma that Ronan could have experienced early on and how his particular diagnoses of reactive attachment disorder and ADHD can really play into heightening those emotional levels and making those impulses potentially a lot more volatile and dangerous.
Sense because Dr. Rappa reviewed records, early childhood records of Ty, and what they show is that he had malnourishment, he was not well taken care of when he was dropped off at the orphanage and while he was there.
Okay, so that answers one of my questions from the state's opening statement that yes, there was malnourishment, there was neglect early on in Ronan or Ty's childhood that may have contributed to early childhood trauma, at least adverse experiences in childhood that could have led to the reactive attachment disorder, difficulty forming bonds of trust with parents, and could lead to that very high emotional reactivity and impulsivity.
We can't know his exact medical history because his biological mother just left him at the orphanage, but the records that Dr. Rappa has reviewed brain development. And it's why the Ferriters continued to see patterns of behavior that would not stop. I want to take you through some of those patterns.
And I think what this attorney is trying to set up is that because of Ronan's behavior, because of how emotionally volatile and behaviorally unpredictable he could be, that the parents had no choice but to lock him up. Keep that in mind here, that we're not just talking about one episode of them like hitting him or beating him or yelling at him, which of course like those are all problematic too, but over weeks on end to when they moved to Florida, have a room in the garage constructed especially for the purpose of imprisoning him, again, not for the entire day and night, but to control his movements and his behaviors. That's a far cry from one spell of bad parenting to something premeditated, predetermined.
Overruled for purposes of opening.
His parents regularly received emails of him fighting at school, punching other kids, using profanity. Announcement. He has his sister stand up and humiliates her in front of the entire class, saying that she's a horrible person. And it was so disturbing to the teacher who was present, who you'll hear from throughout this trial, that she had to report it.
So that's something that wasn't touched on by the state's opening argument, which I guess makes sense. But that there are patterns of Ronan picking fights at school. Again, we don't know what the circumstances are at this point. Going out of his way, it sounds like, to embarrass his sister at school.
Hopes that the challenging work would engage him. It was sort of a math and science type school, so they thought that that would help him stop. It did not. He stood up in class at that school and asked if the Holocaust was a good thing. He was accused of telling a student that they should get aborted. He got up in class and said that immigrants are more likely to be drug dealers. He brought a screwdriver to class and was waving it in someone's face. He stole another student's laptop, hacked into it, and looked up women getting run over by trains.
Sustained.
And he pretended to be a tutor to a friend of his.
Sustained.
And that happened while he was in
Counsel approach.
Okay, I'm not sure what's going on here. Apparently there were a lot of objections to listing what he had done at school, or I guess we can say allegedly done at school.
And then stole her father's credit card and utilized it.
Just overruled as to that.
Thank you, Judge. This is just a handful of the consistent.
All right, so again, lawyers in the comments, let me know what these objections are about. Why were some of them overruled? Why were some of them sustained?
Tell you, as the state said in their opening, that he knows that things are wrong, and he continues to do them. He knows that there are consequences, and he continues to do them. And all this time, Tim and Tracy are racking their brains trying to figure out. These kids go to school, they have their own activities, they have a toddler at one point. They have to be able to get through the day-to-day of just being an adult and having a family, be able to send their child to school safely, knowing that other children will remain safe. So they try to get him into activities to kind of take out his energy. And when they see that's not working, they do counseling. They give him the medications that he's prescribed. They try to help him sleep at night because he keeps wandering the house. They cut sugar from his diet on the recommendation of a pediatrician, that maybe that'll help his behavior, and that'll make him less impulsive. This family is going from place to place to place, from appointment to appointment, trying to figure out how to get this child actual help, how to get a diagnosis, and how to get medication that will change his behavior. And as we discussed in voir dire together, what they found was a revolving door of doctors and therapists, and no one was able to offer them the help that they needed.
This is the part that hits home the most for me. I've had families who have been in my office, or I've been going to their house when I was doing intensive in-home services, where this was their experience, that everything they tried, it just seemed like everything was met with a new obstacle, some new wrinkle in their child's behavior that threw things off. Like they said, they tried cutting sugar out of the diet. Sometimes that's helpful for some kids. But even that, like, he would wander around when it was time to sleep. There's not much that you feel like as a parent that you can do about that except encourage them to sleep, hope they kind of learn from their negative experiences of not sleeping, that sleep is actually really valuable. And I can see why they would think, like, we have to find a way to keep him in his room at night. And yeah, there's just this sense of helplessness and hopelessness that is completely at odds with what you imagine as a parent, that you feel like, oh, I should have authority, I should be able to have control over what happens in the house. There are just some kids who upend all of that, especially when you go to see a bunch of different professionals and they suggest things and nothing seems to really stick. That is probably the worst feeling that you can get. I have seen some things, and this isn't verified, so I want to take this with a grain of salt, that they never stuck with any one provider for long. Again, I don't know that to be the case for sure, but that is one thing that is helpful for anyone to keep in mind when they're doing counseling or seeing somebody for behavioral or emotional stuff, is that sometimes, because these are habits, these are patterns of behavior and thinking and feeling, that it might take a little longer for those to really change. Think of it as starting a new habit when you already have an ingrained habit that is working at completely opposite ends. It's not just taking a pill and then everything disappears. We have to instill new patterns of behavior in place, and that takes time to build. And so I will encourage my clients, even if something doesn't feel like it is making a difference right away, stick with it for a couple of weeks. Make sure we've actually gotten some good run out of it before we say that this isn't working.
Because of that, it's not always going to look pretty, just as it doesn't look pretty in real life when a parent gets mad at their kid.
Absolutely. Parents do get mad. Parents get frustrated. They feel out of control, and like their kids just aren't listening no matter what they do, no matter what consequences they try to use. Again, you're talking about a box in the garage that was constructed by the time the family moved in, that they continued to house him in even when he was going out to school and coming back home to that box. And so that is not just heat of the moment anger acting. that is a continued intention all the way through.
Ronan had been hurting other kids at school. He had been engaging in dangerous behaviors. He's walking around at night, and they did not know if an infant. And that is when they made the decision, while he lived inside their home in Arizona, this is not in the garage, this is in a house, to put a lock on his door. And that was not for the purpose of keeping him locked inside at all times. It was not for the purpose of even punishment. It was for the purpose of monitoring him when they couldn't. Because unfortunately, they're in a situation where they cannot leave this child unattended. There has to be somebody constantly watching him, and they cannot do that as two working adults. Of him around the house, and he will tell you himself that the door was not always locked. But they did use it when he couldn't be supervised.
Okay, so here's my thing. I want to be very careful about saying this. I get the safety piece and that they couldn't physically restrain him, and so the lock on the door, at least in Arizona when he was in the house, I can get how they would get there. But then when that becomes your default mode and he is just by default going to a lockbox in the garage every time he comes home from school, through the whole night or all through the morning, that becomes a problem, because now that is your default mode, is imprisoning him.
In the Arizona house, in the garage, for time. It had a bed, it had a desk, it had Legos. You'll hear from witnesses who actually saw that room. Books that he had in the room in Arizona. So right before Christmas of 2021, that's when we get to sort of the time relevant in this case. The Ferriters moved back to Jupiter, where they lived many, many years ago when the kids were young. And they did books and toys. You'll see videos of him in his room. He's reading. He's talking to his friends. He has Legos there. He is not allowed to have technology in his room alone because that's not something that they felt was safe, but he had other types of activities. He did have like a school Chromebook that was provided by the school. You'll see him FaceTiming with a friend of his. He had posters up on the wall that he, when he got angry, ripped down himself. That's why the walls will look bare. Both the room in Arizona and the one in Florida had one very big design flaw, and that is that it did not include a bathroom. And
that's what you call a design flaw? A basic necessity.
Bucket for the bathroom if he needed to use the bathroom. During the day, he was permitted to move about the house freely, and he could utilize the bathroom in the house itself. And I'm going to be very honest with you, you're going to see him use the bathroom in that bucket a handful of times over this 4 to 5 week period. He's a kid, so he's not waking up and using the bathroom all the time like probably all of us are. And so he uses it a few times, and it's not going to look pretty. But what you have to remember throughout this case, right, is that this was not some big secret life like the state is presenting. These people.
But it was kept secret. If it wasn't a secret, they wouldn't have told Ronan to hide when he was emptying his bucket in the mornings from the neighbors.
Went to doctors. They went to therapists. The schools in Arizona. In Florida, they were only here for about 4 weeks right before Christmas, and then school started. So this is not some sort of that Tom had behavioral issues. Everybody knew that Tim and Tracy were trying to get a diagnosis so that he could get appropriate help, and it never happened. As you review the evidence in this case, you have to remember that the issue at hand is not whether or not Tim Ferriter is a great dad. It is not whether Tim Ferriter did what you would have done, and it's not even if Tim Ferriter did the right thing, because our own expert, Dr. Rappa, will say that he did not, and that those actions could have been damaging to the child. That does not make his actions a crime. The singular question in this case is whether or not there was criminal intent. Because what Tim did not do is have his child arrested, not one time. What he did not do is undergo a failed adoption proceeding where you essentially return a child back to the Department of Children and Families.
Objection, improper.
Sustained.
He paid.
Sustained.
Okay.
No need to approach. I sustain the objection.
He paid for
Okay, talking about the intent, again, I need you lawyers to help me out here. I get that there are different degrees of criminal intent or negligence, but my thinking is like, if you hit someone with your car, whether it's an accident or not, there's real harm done to that person, and there needs to be some sort of justice done. And so I'm not quite seeing what the defense attorney's argument is for lack of intent being something that could exonerate Ferriter here. So again, let me know in the comments.
That he was engaged in, but he had to make tough choices to protect his son, to protect the other kids in his home, and to protect the community from a child who was already showing, a screwdriver in class, hitting other kids. He had to do that. And though he didn't handle it correctly, his intentions were not criminal. Dr. Rappa will testify, based on her extensive experience and review of the records, that what she sees in this case is not malicious. That what she sees in this case is actually very common for parents with children who have such extensive behavioral issues that are hard to sort of diagnose and pinpoint.
I will say this, she's good at her job. She paints a really good picture of the very difficult situation that the Ferriter family was in, that you had a teenager who, at that age, you can't just, push them or pick them up and put them where they need to be anymore, had very strong emotions, very big feelings, and very low inhibition, so high impulsivity to act on those big feelings, as we could hear about. And so she does a good job painting a sympathetic picture of parents who just had no idea what to do next. But again, I'll just go back to the final result. And I've said this in a couple of comments. I just wonder if there were any points that these parents stepped back and looked at what they were doing and like, what has our life become? Like, what are we doing? And so I don't know if they ever had that kind of moment of just like, this isn't right that we are locking our kid in an 8-foot by 8-foot room in the garage. And so that's kind of what I get to, is that at the end of the day, no matter how good the intentions were, this was a harmful act towards a child. I think the attorney is doing a great job trying to argue their way out of that. But again, that's a discussion for the legal people. Again, I just hope that the Ferriter family is able to find some healing throughout this situation for Ronan, for the parents, for the other kids who were in the house. Thank you all so much for checking out this video. This is a very tough topic to talk about, especially as you all can see, I'm very out of my depth when it comes to the legal piece. But I do hope that as a therapist, especially for you parents out there, that you can see that we're not waiting with bated breath to always call CPS or call DSS. I hope that I've demonstrated some empathy towards the situation that Ferriter found himself in. They are very hard choices that the family had to make. But encourage you as parents, seek help, seek support, seek other families, mental health professionals, social work professionals, people who can help throughout the process of being able to parent better, being able to translate your values of loving your family and caring for your kids and protecting your kids to actions that are actually consistent with that. Thank you for checking out this video. Please like and subscribe. That helps our channel to grow and create more content for you all. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll see you next time.